I just wanted to update you, my viewers, on the recount drama in Washington State, which was formally completed just last week in regards to the Public Lands Commissioner race, which is a statewide executive position. And the recount was to determine which of these two candidates here, Democrat King County Councilman Dave Upthegrove and Republican Sue Kell Peterson, which of these guys would actually make it through Washington State's jungle primary process and then face off against Republican former Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler, who's the current frontrunner in this race. Now, we have a lot to discuss since we launched our last video on this topic last week. And for those who care about the election process and the problems uncovered with this recent hand recount, this will be a video that I think you'll enjoy. Now, before we dive into that drama, however, I just want to remind you to hit the like and subscribe button on this channel down below if you haven't already done so. Also, if you do like our content and the videos that we produce here, please feel free to share this video and others with the people who you think might like it. The more people who watch this content, the higher the visibility of our channel, even when they shadow ban us. It is no secret that our government censors are getting frosty once again, and they have been putting pressure on the tech companies to silence or suppress content just like this. And your sharing of this content helps reduce the success of those censorship campaigns. Okay, so now back to the hand recount drama in Washington State. For those who want further background information, I've actually linked to some videos in the video description area down below so that you can get more information about how Washington State's top 2 jungle primary works, for example, or the recent primary election results in Washington State. And then, of course, last week's video, which just helped set the stage for this current recount update video. Now, I don't want to repeat all that information here again, but in quick summary, here's basically where we're at. Washington State had their primary election in August. Because Washington State, foolishly, has gone down this all mail-in voting process, there is no such thing as an election day anymore. Instead, we actually have election month because our state is collecting ballots for weeks before the official election day and then also for weeks after that day as the U.S. Post Office trickles in the ballots that they don't lose along the way on kind of their own sweet time. Now, the initial announced election results, which were made on election night, these really only report roughly half the ballots that have been submitted. So the results can change over the updated results that keep getting announced over the next few weeks as the late trickle-in ballots get dumped off from basically the 39 counties' auditors' offices all around the state. Now, under state law, if an election result is statistically very close, usually less than 0.25%, this ends up triggering an automatic mandatory hand recount. And there was an unanticipated election result from this recent August primary that was so close after 2 weeks that it resulted in one of these mandatory hand recounts. And this was, as I mentioned earlier, the race for the second place in the Washington State Public Lands Commissioner race. Now, this is a statewide executive office that in theory manages Washington State's extensive public lands, mostly forest lands, which are theoretically held in trust to help fund the public education in Washington State. And as I mentioned last week, in a race that included 1.9 million votes statewide, you can see here, there was an initial narrow margin of just 51 votes between Democrat candidate Dave Upthegrove and Republican Sue Kell Peterson. So the Democrat was technically leading at that point, and you can see here with 51 votes, but a hand recount was legally required because of how close it was. Now, a legally required statewide hand recount hasn't actually happened now for a number of years, and this really was just a wonderful opportunity for us to put kind of a microscope on the election process in Washington State and then stress the system a bit to find the weaknesses. And essentially, for those familiar with manufacturing processes and quality control systems, this is actually a great opportunity to actually verify and sample test the results that we're getting. We actually should do this, I believe, on a random, statistically significant basis every single election cycle, and I'll talk about this later in kind of my policy prescription section, but this is why I believe hand recounts are awesome and a very important part of any election process. Now again, remember, the only reason that we even have an opportunity to do this right now was because of how close this election result appeared at certification just a few weeks ago. So at the end of this video, again, I'm going to review a variety of very simple reforms and fixes that can be made, which would make Washington State's, even our state's, low transparency election system far better than it currently is right now. So here's some things that we discovered, and it is worth knowing. Some of this we discussed last week, and there may be a little bit more than what I'm reporting right now, but these are just the basic highlights, and I think they're important. Now, first, the biggest problem uncovered with this hand recount was really the weird omni-ballot online vendor system that was used only and exclusively in King County to digitally online rehab the ballots. Now, when I say rehab, again, what I'm actually referring to is one of the unique and chaotic features of a mail-in ballot scheme like Washington State's program is that ballots can actually be rejected if there's no signature on the envelope or if those signatures don't match whatever signature that is theoretically on file at the auditor's office at the time. Now, with in-person voting, you wouldn't have this problem, so this is really just one of many weird side effects of all mail-in voting schemes that allow kind of wiggle room for bad behavior or disparate treatment. And of course, it makes the process easier to suppress votes. So back to King County. In Washington State, this is actually Washington State's largest county. It includes the city of Seattle in all of its progressive glory and progressive wonder. And King County produces about 28% of the state's total ballots this recent cycle with 559,000 ballots just in King County alone. Now, during a regular November presidential election cycle like the one we're going to have, King County alone is going to process typically more ballots than actually many smaller states in America. Now, again, I kind of brought up this leftist organization funded by state taxpayers named OmniBallot, which is owned by an organization called Democracy Live, which appears to have actually been illegally used to rehab or cure ballots in that county alone using an unapproved and uncertified and certainly unaudited online process. Now, according to a recent lawsuit right here that was filed by the Washington State Republican Party, at least 2,238 ballots were cured using this system. And without these ballots, it is absolutely certain that the Democrat candidate up the Grove would have lost the race. Now, this lawsuit is worth filing because, while Washington state judges are known for being politically controlled and corrupted by the current political system, the law still supports the rejection of this weird kind of third-party program for future election misuse and mischief, and it's good to just address it right now. However, King County is really not alone. As I discussed last week, it really does appear that some malicious partisan behavior by at least some Whatcom County election workers probably suppressed at least 10 Republican-cured votes, while rejecting few, if any, leftist organizations that were also curing ballots at the same time. Now, the weird behavior of election workers is hard to prevent, but exposing the truth is always a good first step, and this must be addressed moving forward. Now, throughout Washington state, there are numerous reports of the post office failing to deliver ballots to their local auditor's office in a timely manner. Now, we had some reports from recent special elections where, for example, the Renton post office in King County, this is just one example, just sat on their ballots until local employees from the county's election office finally realized something was wrong, and they had to drive over and actually collect those ballots that were sitting in a bin at the Renton post office that otherwise would have never been delivered. Now, there's no practical way for us to know how many ballots ended up in the ditch, dumpsters, recycling shredders, or just sitting in some forgotten place at various postal centers all around the state. And I'm sure most government entities that are involved in the scheme would prefer you to not know exactly how many votes are suppressed in this way, even if it's accidentally through just incompetence, if not malicious behavior. Now, I mentioned the 98 ballots that appear to fit this category in Walla Walla, for example. And oops, sorry, the voter did everything right, but these ballots just got here too late for us to count. But there are far more than just this voter suppression happening, I think. And this is just going to be a feature of all mail-in voting. This is one of the many problems with it. In theory, it's a bug, but it has just become a dominant feature of this process now. Now, this is also likely to get worse in the future as the U.S. Postal Service deals with their own drama and problems that are actually really unrelated to our election system, but harmful to states like Washington who have foolishly chosen to outsource so much of the election process to this outside government bureaucracy. Another reason to vote early and to hand deliver your ballots directly to the auditor's office if you can. Now, we are also able to document further process problems in a variety of counties like Thurston, Spokane, and other counties where election observers are prevented as a matter of policy and a willful effort by the local auditor to exclude the observers to see results real time during the hand recount process. Now, I'll use my home county here of Thurston County as the example. But realize they're not alone in this. Now, first of all, there was a story out of Thurston County where the Democrat auditor, Mary Hall, kind of throwing a fit and then creating all types of drama as she tossed an election observer from the Sukell Peterson campaign out of the facility for daring to wear, a Trump t-shirt. Now, this is true. It really did happen, but this is not the real drama in Thurston County. There are some rules for political solicitation near the auditor's office during election cycles, and a t-shirt with a political campaign or candidate featured on the shirt could possibly be considered campaigning. But of course, Mary Hall would absolutely never, and never has, thrown a fit this way over a leftist candidate featured on an observer's t-shirt. This was just a convenient way for Mary Hall to demonstrate to her leftist comrades that she's down with the struggle, and it helps her remind them why she is the person who counts the votes in Thurston County. But no, the real problem actually uncovered in Thurston County and replicated in too many counties, I think, throughout Washington state, is the fact that ballots are counted by batch, not precinct. Now, this isn't a nefarious scheme in itself. It's just simply a way to manage ballot flow when feeding the ballots into an automated counting machine. And by batch counting, it basically allows the process to be more efficient for auditor staff. Statistical sampling of these batches, by the way, would be a good way to quality control the process. But the auditors really resist this, of course. Now, ballots are counted by batch, but the results, when you see kind of the election results, they're actually recorded by precinct number. And this is good because this would theoretically give us a way to hand recount by precinct and then verify the accuracy of the batch counting process at the same time. In a mandated hand recount situation, a county that has nothing to hide and a willingness to do things as transparently as possible would spend a few days to sort their ballots by precinct and then hand recount the precincts. According to observers, for example, this is how Skagit County and other counties who wanted to do the hand recount correctly, this is how they did it. And I'd argue that this most closely follows and conforms to state law and the rules as they currently exist. This is also an excellent way to quality check the process, and I have reported problems uncovered just a few years ago in San Juan County when this was done as well, and we have found some problems in there, I believe it was on Orcas Island in 2020. Now, sloppy counties, or counties who don't want to spend the time to actually separate their ballots into precincts for a mandated hand recount, will typically hand recount batches, particularly in the larger counties who mostly use a clear ballot system. Now, they typically number the batches and they record the results by batch, so it's the lazy way, but also the easy way for them to hand recount the ballots by batches. And then, of course, they verify that they match the original number when they recount it again the next time. Now, while I disagree with this exact methodology, there is still a practical quality control function served by hand recounting each of these batches. For some weird reason, and this is clearly hostile to common sense and transparency, at Mary Hall's direct orders, according to observers, she required the hand recount results by batch to be concealed and hidden from the election observers at the time. And only after the fact, after they reported that miracle of miracles, all the batch hand recounted counts matched, of course. But why hide this information real time from observers? Now, I'm sure Mary Hall has some excuse, but the excuse matters less than the lack of transparency. This really isn't rocket science. Even for Evergreen State College grads, they can understand how the math might not add up. Hand recounts, they can make mistakes too, and where there are discrepancies, they can just spend more time verifying or digging into the results. However, to conceal these numbers from the observers who are there to provide a third-party level of verification real time, there's no reason to go full Venezuela type and try to hide it from the observers and then just report after the fact that everything was perfect. And okay, as far as the actual recount for this election went this year, King County Dave up the Grove, basically he's going to be challenging Republican Jamie Herrera Butler for the Public Lands Commissioner race in November. Now, for those unfamiliar with the Democrat candidate, all you have to remember is the phrase, burn up the Grove, and it will both help you remember his name and his policies for our public forests at the same time. After all, he is a creature of the kind of greeny leftist consortium whose public land policies have helped ensure that most of our public forests will be mismanaged and consumed by fire as long as he can help it. Now, while he lost a few votes overall during the recount, he actually picked up 4, and then Sukell Peterson picked up 6 for a net loss to Up the Grove of 2 votes, according to the Secretary of State anyway. Weirdly and inexplicably, the Sukell-Peterson campaign fumbled some type of early concession statement, which was actually reported in the Seattle Times at that time. And then oddly, it was rejected a few hours later by the campaign. It was kind of weird. I'm not really sure why that happened in light of the state Republican Party lawsuit against King County over this strange omni-ballot scandal. But that is probably a story for another time. And I'm interested in the bizarre thought process behind it. I mean, just a pro hint here. If you are a fraction of a percent behind or ahead, you really just don't concede an election before it's actually certified, and certainly when it's likely to be litigated. Now, to be fair, there were actually 3 candidates total in this primary for this position who opposed letting the public lands burn up as public policy. They included the 2 Republicans, of course, one of whom will actually be on the ballot, but they also included the failed Democrat candidate Kevin VandeWeghe from the Olympic Peninsula. Now, in theory, if the voters for a policy of wise use of public lands would consolidate behind the Republican, Jamie Herrera Butler here, who's the candidate who shares that agenda, then we could actually start to reject the current Democrat kind of leftist public policy of just letting our public lands burn. But we will see in November if that actually happens. For now, there are some clear takeaways from this recent statewide recount of this year's primary election ballots in Washington state. And these are clearly public policy suggestions, and they are reasonable and helpful for future reference, at least for those of us who actually care about election integrity. Now, first of all, I'd say that mail-in voting is very problematic for many reasons, and it is a horrific mistake for any state to take the foolish and horrible policy route that my state of Washington has actually taken to go all mail-in voting after 2011. Please remember, this was originally a bipartisan choice. It was made by some people in bad faith, but probably most of them were politicians who foolishly thought that it was a good idea at the time. There is a very good reason most countries around the world do not allow this type of voting, and in fact, more countries are starting to reject it after they've experimented with it in the past. There are just too many ways to disenfranchise voters and suppress votes. The obvious defective reliance on the U.S. Post Office in America is just one prime example of just a key weakness with its methodology. But with all the drama and turmoil in this federal agency, there just seems to be an underlying desire to pretend right now that there's just nothing to see here. And yet every election we find plenty of examples where ballots are not delivered to the voters in the first place. Or maybe to the auditor's office after they've been mailed, so they were delivered late. Or maybe they piled up in homeless camps like the batch that I've shown my viewers before. This appears to only be getting worse in the future, and I'm fairly certain that this is a small percentage of the total ballots that are distributed like confetti throughout the state. But since nobody wants to really understand the magnitude of this problem, and it is so politicized at this point, we're never going to really solve it, and we're going to just continue to only see these problems when elections are very, very close, like this recent recount exposed. Now, number 2, policy suggestion here. Hand recounts are just a great way to statistically check machine counting systems. I've been involved in a variety of hand recounts all around Washington state in the past 14 years. For the most part, most of the time, the numbers have pretty much matched the original numbers, with a few notable exceptions, like the example that I used a few years ago out of San Juan County. Now, I've gone down the rabbit hole on this issue many, many times, and I completely agree with many of you who leave comments on my videos about the need for all paper ballots for auditing purposes. And I agree with all paper ballots for the very same reason. But my experience has consistently been that the dumb machine counting will, with rare exceptions, match the hand recounts. And I suspect that people who understandably are suspicious of the machines are often lacking the understanding of exactly how that process works. And I don't blame you, due to the purposeful efforts by many in the system to make it seem like some kind of exceptionally complicated process. But the problems that I've helped uncover in the past, long before it became cool to pay attention to the election process after 2020, and since that time, is really that the counting machines are generally not the problem as far as I can tell. The real problems lie in the crufty and just unaudited and unmanaged voter rolls. And again, that's going to be a story for another time. However, it is wise and prudent public policy to require fully transparent, statistically random samples and sample counts of all elections by precincts for both quality control, transparency, and just auditing purposes. This really isn't hard to understand. Randomly chosen precincts, say 15 to 25% of them, from every county, randomly chosen, hand recounted to verify accuracy or discover problems that every election as part of the process has, that would actually help things. This means you don't cover up the hand recount numbers from the observers like Thurston County Auditor Mary Hall does and others, and just to keep it open and transparent and just make it part of the process. This is just logical, and I think it's very good policy. Number 3, even though I believe that it's already illegal to do this recent exposure of the unauditable, taxpayer-funded kind of third-party shady organization running the omni-ballot scheme is just a fiasco of problems that can easily be avoided by just simply not doing it in the first place. I mean, King County's always screwing up their elections with costly schemes just like this, and it is easily avoided just by not doing it in the first place. Number 4, although if we didn't have mail-in ballots, the weird program of rehabbing ballots wouldn't even be an issue. If we are going to allow this type of election scheme, then we can't have government employees actively discriminating on a partisan basis which ballots they allow to be rehabbed versus not rehabbed, as we appear to have discovered in Whatcom County. I'm not sure how widespread this is yet. As best I can tell, the Republicans during this recent primary were actually pretty effective at rehabbing a large number of ballots, more than I've ever seen them do before. It was somewhere around 1,000 this year, and it actually appears that the left did roughly about the same, not including the omni-ballot weirdness, which is a separate story. And this is just a lot of work to do this. However, when public employees start to openly discriminate against accepted ballots based on the perceived party affiliation of whoever's rehabbing them, we have an obvious discrimination problem, and there should be a deeper investigation into this issue, and it must be fixed. 5, and this is kind of finally, this specific election should not have been this close. It really shouldn't have been. Many people recognize that there was an opportunity for the Republicans, just like they did in 2016, to actually clinch both candidates through the top 2 primary for the Public Lands Commissioner position in this race. Back in April of this year, I remember discussing it with people then, even before filing week closed in May. The stage actually was well set for this outcome because so many Democrats were running for that position and doing what Republicans usually do, and they were splitting up the vote. Even if one of those Democrats probably siphoned off a number of Republican votes as well, but most political insiders recognize this as a distinct possibility. The Republican Party's formal endorsement of the extremely underfunded Sue Kell Peterson campaign that actually helped boost her campaign just enough. And with Jamie Herrera Butler's well-funded effort, it was a reasonable plan at the time. However, they just needed just a few more votes, 50 to be exact, out of 1.9 million. Now, these things don't have to come down to hand recounts every single time we have an election. With the total voter turnout, which was actually just under 41% in the primary, it isn't hard to realize that we only needed just a handful of voters willing to get off their couches or their phones and actually vote to produce the outcome in this race, where we would have had 2 people on the ballot who didn't want to burn down our public forests instead of just 1. Now, your vote doesn't always count that much, but in this recent example, clearly it should have. Even if you don't want to work hard out there and you're basically willing to just accept whatever happens to you and your family, and filling out and delivering that ballot is all you feel capable of doing to help, just please do it so the rest of us who are actually willing to work and make an impact with deeper time commitments and action, you can actually give us more to work with. In the end, we have a lot of work to do to clean up the mess of our modern monstrosity of bureaucracy and creaky government. We have corruption to overcome, lots of it, unfortunately. We have blundering incompetence to reduce, and then inevitably some serious downsizing and streamlining of government if we truly care about freedom and liberty for the future. But it certainly is easier for us to do this if we can get a bit more help, and another 50 people in a state of 7 million like Washington State. That just isn't too much to ask for. So if you have any doubt or believe your vote doesn't count, please vote anyway. Vote for freedom and liberty, or at least the closest you can get to it, and help us out. Showing up is just the first step to making a difference because, as I always say, the future belongs to those who show up.